If it's Tuesday, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth lashes out at Pentagon leakers and the media as NBC News reveals new details about the sensitive military information he shared with his brother and wife using his personal phone. Plus, the White House doubles down on the administration's mass deportation plan and defends President Trump's unprecedented use of executive authority on immigration as Democrats dig in on the fight over due process. And the Trump administration cracks down on student loans, warning millions of delinquent borrowers they now have 2 weeks to start paying up or else. Hi there and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles in Washington with a packed show ahead on a very busy day in politics. But first, the roller coaster continued today on Wall Street. Stocks just finished the trading day with a big rally after yesterday's big sell-off. The Dow closed higher by more than 1,000 points. Stocks were significantly higher across the board, with investors seemingly pinning their hopes on some private comments by Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent about potential de-escalation in the administration's trade war with China. NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung joins me now with more on the markets. So, Brian, these were closed-door comments by the secretary, and it's unclear if they reflect the president's view, but the markets ran with it anyway?
Yeah, it's an important kind of couching there, but all of this is kind of coming as of this reporting, which we and our White House team here at NBC News did get attributable to a person in the room, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, telling a private investor summit today that he could see a near-term de-escalation in the U.S.-China tariff dispute, as you'll recall, ratcheting up those effective tariff rates to something closer to 145%, China responding in kind. Negotiations with Beijing have not yet begun, so this is kind of optimism coming seemingly from nowhere, but it does match up with what we've heard from Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, who did say on the record that on a potential trade deal with China, the White House says that they are doing, quote, very well. They're trying to set the stage for a deal with China is the way that they're describing it. But either way, markets seem to have liked that news, with the Dow Jones ending the day up over 2%. But I want to point out, with all the volatility, it's been hard to keep track. As of the beginning of this year, if you put $1 into the Dow Jones, you're still down 7.9%. And up until today's rally, we were breaking some pretty bad records, like, for example, 63 trading days since Inauguration Day, the S&P 500 fell by 14%. That was the worst start to a presidential term since the index began back in 1929. So again, these are not good records to be breaking, but it does seem like at least we got a little bit of green on the screen off of even just the little tiniest bit of hope that those trade discussions could be going well, Ryan. And
it's interesting, you know, kind of an off-the-cuff comment by the Treasury Secretary sends the Dow rallying, but at the same time, we have the IMF warning of a major negative shock on the global economy from Trump's tariffs. It seems like there's still quite a bit of uncertainty ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, when we talk about the financial markets here in the United States, we also forget that we're talking about the impact of these tariffs globally as well. The International Monetary Fund, in alignment with their spring meetings, which they hold this time of year, usually on a regular schedule, they released a new economic forecast that not only projected the rate of U.S. GDP, which is a measure of economic growth, going down for 2025 as a result of these tariff policies, but around the world as well. Prior to the tariffs, they were expecting global growth to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 3.3% for 2025. Now they're revising that down to 2.8%, singularly because of the U.S. tariff policies. They said that, quote, the swift escalation of trade tensions and extremely high levels of policy uncertainty are expected to have a significant impact. A reminder that it's not just the United States. There's a global impact to all this as well, Ryan.
Okay, Brian, thank you for breaking that all down for us. We appreciate it. Let's turn now here to Washington, where the White House remains defiant once again, standing by embattled Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, despite reports of turmoil and chaos at the Pentagon under his leadership, and new details about the highly sensitive military information he shared with members of his family. This morning, Secretary Hegseth lashed out, blaming the reports on disgruntled former employees who, we should know, were individuals that Hegseth brought with him to the Defense Department and were part of his inner circle at the Pentagon.
When you dismiss people who you believe are leaking classified information, and again, the investigation is ongoing and that will take time, and when the evidence produced, it will go to DOJ, why would it surprise anybody, Brian, if those very same people keep leaking to the very same reporters whatever information they think they can have to try to sabotage the agenda of the president or the secretary. So once a leaker, always a leaker, often a leaker.
NBC News is exclusively reporting that the sensitive information that Hegseth shared with his family came from secure messages he received from a top general and included details about imminent strikes against Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. Hegseth sent that information to his wife, brother, and personal lawyer using his personal device less than 10 minutes after he received it. Now, despite that, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reiterated the president's support for his defense secretary.
The Secretary of Defense is doing a tremendous job, and he is bringing monumental change to the Pentagon. And there's a lot of people in this city who reject monumental change, and I think, frankly, that's why we've seen a smear campaign against the Secretary of Defense since the moment that President Trump announced his nomination before the United States Senate. Let me reiterate, the president stands strongly behind Secretary Hegseth in the change that he is bringing to the Pentagon.
Now, even as the president stands by Secretary Hegseth, the administration is now facing pressure from inside the GOP to let him go. Republican Congressman from Nebraska, Don Bacon, who's a member of the House Armed Services Committee and a former Air Force general, telling NBC News, if the reports were true regarding Secretary Hegseth, it is unacceptable, and I wouldn't tolerate it if I was responsible. Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard and NBC News senior national security correspondent Kornacki, who is at the Pentagon. So, Vaughn, what are you hearing from officials inside the White House? How long is the president willing to stand by his defense secretary? Does it seem if his patience is wearing thin at all?
We're not hearing from cabinet officials, from administration officials. We are not hearing from Republican members of Congress outside of, we should note, Don Bacon is just one. We are not hearing also from key allies of Pete Hegseth that were instrumental in his confirmation process and his tapping to be the defense secretary in the first place. People like Don Jr., the president's son. And this isn't a question of his loyalty or commitment to the president or the president's mission at the Pentagon. This is a question of national security. And so far we have seen, as you heard from Caroline Leavitt, and so far we have heard from the president that they still have confidence in him. Of course, during the confirmation process back this winter, while Courtney was reporting extensively about sexual misconduct allegations, excessive drinking history, the transition incoming White House team continued to stand by him. And so far, we're seeing that play out right now, too.
Now, he appeared on Fox News this morning, the secretary. He remained defiant, though notably, he still has not denied any of these reports. Is that a strategy that is resonating within the White House?
At this point in time, we have seen him take we saw it not only in the Fox and Friends interview here this morning, but we saw it during the Easter egg roll yesterday with his kids standing behind him in the White House Easter backdrop behind him. We are seeing stark denials. It's so often it's the type of strategy that we've seen deployed by the president himself against the allegations, including some which led to the courtroom for the president. And so in so many ways, Pete Hegseth is echoing and mirroring the type of defense strategy that the president himself has played. And so far, there is little indication that there is any intent to have a mass overhaul, despite several senior advisors and close individuals to Hegseth leaving the Pentagon. So far, at this point in time, we are seeing little indication that he is on his way out either.
All right, Vaughn, stay there because we're going to come back to you on another story in just a second. But, Courtney, let's go to you at the Pentagon, where you can take us inside your reporting. I know that the secretary is acting like this isn't that big of a deal, the information that he may or may not have been sharing. But what do we know about this second signal chat that included members of his family and his personal lawyer? And what are the potential ramifications of his actions had that information fallen into the wrong hands?
Yeah, so this is the second signal chat. He is using the exact same language that we heard about the first one, which is no classified information on there, was no war plans were on there. Well, those aren't allegations. There's no one who's talking about the potential for war plans to have been on this. But what is really different about the first signal story that we all heard from The Atlantic when Jeffrey Goldberg was inadvertently added to a signal chat in which Secretary Hegseth included detailed plans about an imminent military action against the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Well, in this case, the chat was started by Secretary Hegseth, and he shared, again, more information about this imminent attack against the Houthi rebels. And what we've learned now, Ryan, is that, in fact, he got information directly from the commander of U.S. Central Command, General Eric Kurilla. He, of course, is responsible for that area in the Middle East. where Yemen actually falls into his area of responsibility. He was sending specific information to Secretary Hegseth, and then literally moments later, less than 10 minutes later, Secretary Hegseth took the information that Kurilla sent on a classified system, put it on a signal chat, and sent it on to the chat that was that included the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, and then only moments later also sent some similar information to that chat that, as you said, included family members, his wife, his brother, his personal attorney, and some people directly in his inner circle. And of course, that opens up the question, yes, the first chat that had senior Trump administration officials, the National Security Advisor, why would Secretary Hegseth's wife and brother and people close to him need to know information about this? The fact that General Kurilla sent it on a classified system would indicate that it would likely have been a higher level of classification because the mission had already been approved to go and because it was imminent. And this included aircraft, specific types of aircraft, times bombs were going to be dropping, the kind of information that if it had fallen into the wrong hands, these were manned aircraft that were flying over Yemen. And Ryan, just to show you the potential here for disaster for the men and women flying those aircraft, the Houthis have shot down more than a dozen drones, MQ-9 Reaper drones that have been flying over Yemen. The last one was shot down only days ago. They have proven the ability to contest the airspace over Yemen. It is not a safe space for the military members to be flying over. That information could have put lives at risk, Ryan.
And Courtney, we only have about 30 seconds, but how is this impacting the mood inside the Pentagon right now?
The one thing that I keep hearing now more than ever is about accountability. Secretary Hegseth, when he came to the Pentagon, he and many people around him have touted the fact that they are going to bring accountability back to the Pentagon. Men and women in uniform who I've spoken to are saying, will there be accountability here? Secretary Hegseth has not denied that he started this chat, that it included information about Yemen. Instead, he has gone after the reporters who reported it. He's gone after individuals who he claimed leaked the information. And he has stayed with that one talking point. There was no classified information included. Ryan?
I wonder about the accountability when we're talking about this. Okay, Courtney, thank you for that. We appreciate it. Let's turn now to the issue the Trump administration would rather be talking about than its embattled Secretary of Defense, and that's its continued immigration crackdown. Today, the White House doubled down on its deportation agenda, with Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt expressing confidence the courts will side with the president when it comes to his use of a wartime authority to deport migrants without due process.
We are obviously complying with the court's order. However, it was a temporary pause. The Supreme Court basically said, sit tight, and they will follow up with an order. And we're confident that the Supreme Court will rule on the side of law and recognize the president absolutely has the executive authority to deport foreign terrorists from our nation's interior under the Alien Enemies Act. It is our goal to deport as many illegal criminals and aliens from our country as we possibly can, as quickly as we can.
This, of course, comes as multiple high-profile immigration cases remain tied up in the courts, including the one involving Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland father who the administration claims is a gang member, which his wife and attorney deny. Abrego Garcia was forcibly removed to El Salvador without due process, despite a 2019 court order barring him from being sent there. NBC News correspondent David Noriega visited the neighborhood he fled from and filed this report.
This part of San Salvador, San Marcos, this is where Kilmar Abrego Garcia grew up. And the people here tell me that back in the 2000s, when he was a child and a teenager here, is right when the gang started really exerting total control over not only this neighborhood, but large swaths of the city and of all of El Salvador. More control even than the government itself. People here used to feel afraid to walk out their door even in the middle of the daytime for fear of crossing an invisible boundary into a rival gang's turf and potentially paying for it with their lives. Now that has changed dramatically in just the last few years, thanks to the sweeping crackdown by the Nayib Bukele government on the gangs. Now, that crackdown involved imprisoning more than 80,000 people in the span of 2 or 3 years with very little to no due process. Most people here are grateful for the dramatic improvements in public safety that they feel. What I'm doing here now, I would not have been able to do just a few years ago without requesting permission from the gangs that controlled this territory. That's now no longer the case. And people who know about the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, which is most of them, in many cases are inclined to agree with the government's position. They say that if Abrego Garcia was sent here, it must have been for a reason. However, there are a number of people that I've spoken to who disagree with the government's willingness to accept deportees from the United States and who are willing to criticize the government for doing so, but only off camera. people are not willing to say that to us on camera, and there's a reason for that. They hear stories all the time of people who've been swept up in the Bukele administration crackdown on the gangs for false accusations, for misunderstandings, people who are innocent and have wound up in prison here, often with little to no recourse, little access or no access to the outside world. That means people are very, very, very scared, very unwilling to publicly criticize the government. I had one person tell me this morning explicitly that whereas they used to fear the gangs, now they fear the government. Ryan?
All right, David Noriega in El Salvador. Thank you for that, David. Back with me now, NBC's Vaughn Hilliard, and I want to turn to the other deportation cases. You spoke to one of the detainees being held in Texas, whom the Trump administration was hoping to deport under the Alien Enemies Act. What do we know about him? Does he have any clarity on what his status is as these legal challenges work their way through the courts?
Right, Ryan. Eduardo Dabuin Raul was among the at least 30 individuals, Venezuelan nationals, who have been accused of being a part of Tren de Aragua, who were on the bus Friday night, destined for Abilene Airport. They say that they were told that they were going to be on a deportation flight, taking them to El Salvador, much like Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And it was in the middle of a federal hearing when the Judge Boasberg, asked the DOJ lawyer if, in fact, there were any flights that were going to be taking off that night. When he asked him that, this motorcade in Texas was on its way to the airport. And at that point in time, DHS tells me that they got a call canceling the trip. And that is where the Supreme Court, putting that pause on those flights, effectively prevented these individuals, including Eduardo, from being sent to El Salvador. And if that pause were to be lifted, the DHS would be able to move forward with those flights. And I bring up Eduardo specifically. I have been in contact with his wife, and I interviewed him yesterday. And we have looked extensively at NBC through criminal records and databases. We have not found any arrest records. This is somebody who I have reached out to DHS and ICE now for 4 days in a row, asking for records or evidence of his involvement with Tren de Aragua. They have provided none. I just actually got a statement literally in the last 2 minutes for the first time from a DHS official who says, why does the mainstream media continue to peddle these gang members' false sob stories? DHS has confirmed this man is a member of Tren de Aragua and a human smuggler. And I think the context of this is important because, of course, in so many ways it is difficult to know the entirety of the background of each of these individuals. But Eduardo and his wife deny that he has gang affiliation. He came into the United States in 2023 legally through the P1 parole program. He had a monthly checkup with ICE officials at his El Paso field office. And it was not until March 18th that he was detained, and they say that he was accused for the first time of being a member of Tren de Aragua because of his tattoos. March 18th is notable because that came just 3 days after the Alien Enemies Act was invoked by the president to target Venezuelan nationals with connections to Tren de Aragua, like they are now accusing Eduardo of. There are questions here that DHS and ICE has not provided outside of making the accusation, but they have provided no evidence. And if the Supreme Court were to lift its pause, individuals like Eduardo could go to El Salvador. And of course, we have seen with like Kilmar Abrego Garcia and so many others, a reticence from this administration to request their return to go through a due process or go before an immigration judge.
Yeah, there certainly has to be a level of anxiety of being put on a plane and taken out of the country, and how difficult it may be to fight your legal case from abroad. Vaughn, thank you for staying on top of that. We appreciate it.
That's right.
Coming up, what to know about the Trump administration's plan to crack down on millions of student loan borrowers who are in default or late on their payments. Plus, a major shakeup at the State Department. Secretary Marco Rubio defends a new plan to overhaul the agency, including cuts to the workforce and the downsizing of human rights programs. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The Trump administration is sending an urgent warning to millions of student loan borrowers. It is time to pay up. The Department of Education announced yesterday afternoon that it will resume collecting on defaulted loans starting in 2 weeks on May 5th, and that it could move to garnish wages for some borrowers. The government has not collected on defaulted student loans since March of 2020. Speaking in the White House briefing this afternoon, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called the current state of federal student loans unsustainable.
We must get our fiscal house in order and restore common sense to our country. If you take out a loan, you have to pay it back. It's very simple. President Trump will not kick the can down the road anymore.
Now, according to the Department of Education, more than 42 million borrowers currently owe more than $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. Of those borrowers, more than 5 million are in default, meaning they haven't made a monthly payment in at least a year. And an additional 4 million are in late-stage delinquency after failing to make a payment in the last 3 to 6 months. Just 38% of borrowers are up to date on their payments. The announcement comes amid years of confusion and turmoil for federal student loan borrowers. The government lifted a years-long pause on reporting late loan payments to credit bureaus at the start of this year, causing many borrowers' credit scores to drop, while others are in forbearance because of legal fights over Biden-era repayment plans. Joining me now to discuss the state of student loans is Washington Post national higher education reporter Danielle Douglas-Gabriel. Danielle, there's got to be a lot of people freaking out right now related to this policy change from the Trump administration. If you can, just break down some of the chaos surrounding student loans right now. Collections are starting. There's also this issue of credit bureaus now getting the reporting of people being delinquent. And then there's also the issue of continued forbearance. Just try and make sense of it for us.
So, like you said, there are a lot of things happening all at the same time. But to be fair, there was a setup for this happening. I think the Biden administration had told student loan borrowers that this was coming. But in talking to a lot of different borrowers over the last several months, many were not aware, right? And honestly, I can totally understand how one could be confused about going back into full repayment. So, as you mentioned, during the pandemic, many people had their student loans paused, and that ended in 2023. But then the Biden administration gave folks a 12-month grace period, right? Another extension of sorts where you could miss payments and it wouldn't be reported to the credit bureaus. That ended September 30th of last year. And when that did, a lot of people still weren't aware that they needed to start making payments. So I think some of the 4 million people that you're seeing who miss payments for 3 to 6 months are part of that population who weren't totally certain that this was it. This is time to start making payments. And then on top of that, you have a lot of the most affordable repayment plans, known as income-driven repayment plans, had been shut down for several months because of the court case that you mentioned earlier and an injunction that's in place. Now the Department of Education has reopened the application for those payment plans, but there's still a pretty sizable backlog. I think about 1.9 million people are in what's known as a processing forbearance, where they're not being asked to make payments as their applications for one of these affordable repayment plans are awaiting processing. So that's going to also resume next month. So we should start to see far more people than just the 38% that are currently in repayment starting to pay down their loans.
And if you are in this class of borrower that just can't afford to make these payments, what could end up happening to you?
I mean, certainly, you know, if you are unable to make your payments and your loans go delinquent, you will see your credit scores drop. If your loans go from delinquency to default, now that could have severe consequences on your ability to take out a loan, a mortgage, car loan. It could also affect your ability to get an apartment in some states, as well as a job in some instances. You know, there are lots of steps that borrowers can take to avoid those consequences of possibly losing your tax refund. That's another way that the government can collect involuntarily, as well as garnishing your wages. Some of the things that, you know, when I talk to borrowers, I would suggest contact your student loan servicer. If you don't know who that is, go on studentaid.gov, look up your loans, see which servicer you are assigned to, and talk to them about potentially a hardship forbearance if you really can't afford your loans, or enrolling in one of those affordable income-based repayment plans, which tie your monthly payments to your earnings. And that should at least afford you a more, you know, reasonable way and strategy to pay down your loans.
Probably the best advice, though, is not just to ignore it. This is serious. These payments need to start being paid back, and they're not going to fool around with it. Danielle, a very complex topic. Thank you so much for breaking it down for us so concisely. We appreciate it. And we're going to turn now to another major development out of the Trump administration, as the State Department today announced a major overhaul of that agency that is expected to shut down more than 100 offices and eliminate around 700 positions. In a post published by the State Department, Secretary Rubio defended the overhaul while vowing it would, quote, drain the bloated bureaucratic swamp, empowering the department from the ground up. Joining me now is NBC News reporter Julia Jester to help us understand what's going on. So, Julia, walk us through this. I mean, this could really be a dramatic overhaul of the State Department.
It is quite a shakeup. There are a lot of bureaus that have been moved around and consolidated, but some have been eliminated entirely. There are ones like Diversity and Inclusion Office and the Office of Global Women's Issues that seem like pretty prime targets from the Trump administration's shifting priorities, but there are some that are a little bit surprising in this. You have the Office of Global Criminal Justice, the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization, and the Foreign Service Institute all shuttering as a result of this move. And, you know, the question is, how much did Doge and Elon Musk have to do with this? Well, the State Department spokesperson said at today's briefing that Doge was not in charge, but a lot of these moves were a result from what the State Department learned from Doge, and there's still an influence within the building. You look at the acting head of foreign assistance, Jeremy Lewin, that is Doge associate, and so there are pretty steep cuts and shuffling around to adhere to the administration's new priorities, but some staffers I've spoken with are concerned that they'll be able to do the work given this reduction in force and closing of these bureaus.
And obviously this could perhaps mean a change in priorities for the administration. One of the units getting shut down is the Office of Global Criminal Justice. They're in charge of monitoring war crimes and human rights violations around the world. I mean, are there concerns that there could just be responsibilities that this department has that are going to fall to the wayside?
Yes, that is a concern I'm hearing from employees within the State Department, and they're not unfounded given the consolidation in these bureaus. But what State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said at today's briefing is that just because an office is closing does not mean that the work is going away. Now, it's interesting because some of these bureaus are consolidating, but for the shuttering of an office like that, she kind of danced around this topic at the briefing. Take a listen to what she told reporters earlier today.
Because you might have had a specific bureau that dealt with a discrete issue, doesn't mean because it's now folded into another larger bureau, doesn't mean that it's gone or we don't care. It means that, in fact, certain issues deserve to be considered part, not like some specialized, separate, segregated interest. Why shouldn't that interest be in every bureau?
Now, that argument does make sense to integrate within all of the different bureaus and not have a standalone separate area. But with a 15% reduction in force expected and a potential early retirement program offer, employees are concerned that the State Department will be able to continue its work as this restructuring shakes out. So it's a wait-and-see approach right now, Ryan, as to how that will affect the global
less
influence.
people to do the job will definitely make it harder. All right, Julia Jester, thank you for that. After the break, the future of the Catholic Church and its leadership after the passing of Pope Francis. We'll have a look at the Cardinals, who are seen as the top contenders in the historic contest to be the next Pope. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Today, as the Vatican prepares for days of tribute, we're learning new details about the final hours of Pope Francis. The 88-year-old pontiff died Monday morning after suffering a stroke and heart failure. The Holy See office says he did not appear to suffer, and his last words to his health assistant were simply thank you. His body now rests in the chapel in his Vatican residence. Starting tomorrow through Friday, the Pope will lie in state in St. Peter's Basilica. The funeral mass will be Saturday morning. Burial will be set at Rome's Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore later this week. President Trump and Melania Trump are expected to be among the tens of thousands gathered to say goodbye. Nearly 60 cardinals are already in Vatican City for days of prayer and preparation for the conclave, with more expected to arrive in the coming days. And for more on the conclave, the secretive election process rooted in nearly 750 years of tradition, NBC's Steve Kornacki joins us now at the big board for something a little different than his normal big board fare. But Steve, not dissimilar from what you normally do, just maybe a different setting. Walk us through what happens next.
Yeah, different kind of election. No one's going to be an announced candidate. There's not going to be ads. There's not going to be rallies. We're not even going to officially know the exact results. We'll know the winner, but I'll tell you about how they burn the ballots here in a second as part of the procedure. So what's going to happen? It's the College of Cardinals, members of the College of Cardinals, who will be the voters in this election, but not every member of the College of Cardinals, only those younger than 80 years old. And there are 135 of them. They call them cardinal electors. That's the electorate for this race. Then they are sworn to secrecy as they enter that conclave. And at the end of each round of voting, the ballots are taken and they are burned. So there is literally no record of the exact results. They just know if somebody won or somebody didn't. Per day, it's a maximum of 4 rounds of voting. And no matter how many ballots it takes, a 2/3 supermajority is going to be required to be the next pope. Now, let's take a look at that electorate of 135 cardinal electors. Here's something interesting. This has to do with how Pope Francis ran the church. His agenda, in part here in terms of administration, was to broaden out the power in the church, to take it away from Rome, away from Europe, where it's been concentrated traditionally, and to spread it out. So he appoints the members of the College of Cardinals. And again, among this group of voters, look at this. The last time there was a conclave, the one that elected Francis, more than half came from Europe, under 40% this time. Meanwhile, look at the growth in Asia. Again, that's was part of Francis's agenda as Pope. It was to expand the church's reach through cardinals in places like Asia, where there's growing Catholic populations. North America, by the way, about the same, a tick down from 2013. Also keep in mind here, along those same lines, 72 different countries will be represented by cardinal electors this time. That's a big jump from the last one, 2013. Again, that's the work of Francis there. And Francis will also loom over these proceedings in this way. Of those 135 cardinal electors, 108 were appointed by Francis. That is 80% of them. They became cardinals because Francis appointed them cardinals. Now, these are some of the names that are out there right now. Again, nobody announces their candidacy. There's no endorsements. We really don't know how they stack up against each other here. But these are some of the names you're seeing here. For instance, Peter Erdo from Hungary, maybe on the more conservative side. Luis Tagle from the Philippines, maybe more on the progressive side. But when you see these lists, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is take it with a grain of salt, because, again, the last time around in 2013 when they had a conclave, when they had lists like this, Pope Francis's name, the future Pope Francis's name, was not generally on them. So surprise is very possible here, especially with all of these new cardinals, many of whom have really never met each other before.
Yeah, a little difficult to do an office pool around the papal candidacy, Steve Kornacki, but at least you've set us up for success if there are any plans for that. We appreciate it.
You got it.
Up next, Democrats demand for due process. I'll talk to a House Democrat who just got back from a trip to El Salvador about what's next as the Trump administration doubles down on its mass deportation agenda. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Another day of congressional recess, another raucous town hall for a House Republican. Last night, we heard a mix of boos and cheers at a town hall held by Florida Congressman and gubernatorial candidate Byron Donalds. Here's a bit of his response supporting the Trump administration on the Abrego Garcia saga.
An illegal alien in the United States does not have more due process rights than an American citizen. They do not. No, they don't have the same, sir, because they're not a United States citizen. President Biden abused the asylum procedures of the United States government and allowed tens of millions of illegal immigrants into the United States. We do not have enough trial judges to adjudicate all of their asylum. You're going to saddle the American people with having to go through immigration hearings on tens of millions of people because Joe Biden was derelict in his duty of upholding federal law? I say no.
Joining me now on set is Julia Manchester, national politics reporter for The Hill, Democratic pollster and NBC News political analyst Cornell Belcher, and Republican strategist T.W. Arrighi. Julia, let's start with you here. We've seen a lot of Republicans weigh in on the Abrego case, the Abrego Garcia case. They're hammering Democrats, accusing them of associating with a gang member. Byron Donalds there finding a different angle, I think, on the due process argument that Democrats are making back. Does it track? Does it have any resonance?
You know, I think it potentially does. I think Byron Donalds is in a very different position than maybe some of these swing district, swing Republicans running in very competitive states. Byron Donalds is running for governor in Florida, so he's running in a very red state. So he doesn't have to, you know, answer those questions the same way. But, you know, I think it's been interesting talking to progressives and Democrats over the past couple of weeks, you know, and asking them about what their strategy is going forward. And they repeatedly point to Chris Van Hollen as someone, you know, when asked, you know, how do you respond to the Trump administration when you're in the minority? They say, look at Chris Van Hollen, and you're seeing House Democrats like Maxwell Frost from Florida, for example, doing that and traveling to El Salvador, making this statement and coming back. I don't know how much of an impact this is going to have in the midterms, because you have Democrats and Republicans who also have to address other issues like the cost of living, for example.
TW, I wonder, though, about this argument that, well, the last administration screwed it up. Does that give you license to not go through the proper legal process, though, when you're dealing with a claim like this?
Well, I definitely think it gives license to be more aggressive in your immigration policy. And I think the due process argument to one side for a moment, I think what you're seeing right now and why the Abrego Garcia case is sticking so much is because I think most Americans look at this and they're wondering, at least from my vantage point, seeing from optics, is this really the case study for the entire criticism that Democrats are levying, right? We're being told by the Democrats that all these people, thousands, tens of thousands of innocent people are being swept up and deported out. And they were told that this father in Maryland was deported fully illegally, only to find out that he once did have a deportation order, that he had ties with the MS-13 gang. Sure, but that
hasn't been fully adjudicated.
But if this is the hill that the Democrats want to die on, I think politically speaking, it's fraught.
Okay, I'd like to push you a little bit on this idea of it just being not necessarily all the people that are being deported, but even one person not getting due process. Sure. And there's one person in particular who's concerned about that, and that's Joe Rogan. Listen to what he said on his podcast about this.
The problem with things that are going in a radical direction, and then there's an overcorrection. So the overcorrection is lack of due process. The overcorrection is like round them all up, ship them to jail. Like that's like some things that you say when you're not thinking things through.
Now, this was before Rogan went on a full rant about how accusing Democrats of putting us in this position. But Rogan's argument here is if you cross that due process line, it could impact way more than just this one person involved in the middle.
I think Joe Rogan's right. I agree with him. My contest on this and why I just don't believe that this is a great case study for Democrats to be pushing as much if, in fact, all these innocent people are being deported is because he was put in front of courts who did find he had ties to MS-13, who did arrest him alongside other MS-13 members, who did have a had beat his wife, all these different things. It's just not a great case.
His wife, that's not.
Pushed a restraining order.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, she also,
I believe her.
She retracted that and said that wasn't necessarily the case. But Cornell, is one case?
I don't have to say anything, right? Just listen to this. Listen to them tie themselves into knots to try to go through a process of why they're doing something that most Americans fundamentally think is wrong. Right. Look at the polling data on this. Polling data is clear, and they're losing independents left and right around this. This is a quintessential American value. You don't have to make up all these different stories and demonize someone, because they can be as bad a person as we've ever seen. You steal in this country, get due process, right? That is a fundamental American value. It's in our Constitution as part of our framework of government. And the ideal that the Trump administration is just blowing through that, right? It's not just people in the middle, it's not even people on the left, but you've heard Republicans come out and have problems with this. So at some point, it's becoming untenable. And I do actually think that this is a part of a broader conversation that's going to be part of the midterms, because what are independent voters most ticked off about, right? They're ticked off about inflation, but they're also ticked off about fundamentally, as Joe Rogan says, this is overreach. This is problematic.
But Republicans, Julia, already seem to think that this is a winning argument. Listen to this NRSC ad against John Ossoff, who's one of the most endangered Democratic senators from Georgia. Listen to this ad.
Welcome to El Salvador, home to breathtaking sunsets, world-class surf breaks, and gangbanger Kilmar Abrego Garcia. El Salvador is the destination for Democrats seeking the thrill of bringing violent, criminal, illegal aliens back to America.
So Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, said that he believes this is an 80-20, or at least he thinks Republicans view this as an 80-20 winning issue for Republicans. They seem to be doubling down on this, Julia.
Right. Well, Gavin Newsom is also saying that Republicans are using this as a distraction from other issues. Look, I think Republicans are leaning into using this to lean into two issues that worked well for them in the last cycle, which is crime and immigration. And I think in Kilmar Abrego Garcia, they're trying to tie those things together. If it works, I don't know, particularly with Abrego Garcia, but I think that's what this is hinging on.
Okay, so let's talk about the economy, TW. How does Donald Trump pivot from this immigration argument to the economy is strong? That's my number one issue. When he has a stock market that's in turmoil, all the criticism around this tariff implementation, is that a winning issue still for Republicans?
We have to wait and see, unfortunately. Look, this is a divisive issue within our own party, right? The tariff policy. Donald Trump sees this as a two-front war here internationally. He has China and the rest of the world. In China, the objective is reshoring jobs that were lost during NAFTA. Well, that was Canada, Mexico, but all the free trade agreements we went to, and then the lowering rates to make American products more accessible overseas. His famous quote, when was the last time you saw a Ford in Tokyo? That's going to take time. He needs to start announcing some deals soon to reassure the markets. And I don't know where the China issue is going to lead to, but in places like Michigan with UAW workers and factory workers across the Rust Belt, it is a winning issue. We need to wait and see a little bit longer.
Can Democrats capitalize on this right now, Cornell?
So let's break this down. So NBC's polling, right, shows that majority of Americans think the president has not spent enough time on inflation and the cost of living. In fact, if they've spent half the time on inflation and the cost of living as they spent chasing DEI, we'd probably be in a different place right now. The stock market is cratering, right? Consumer confidence is cratering. Right now, we see something in the numbers that we have not seen for a long, long time, and that is Republicans' job approval on the economy is actually underwater. This is a president who once had approval on the economy above water. That was one of the strong points of his brand. That has absolutely eroded, and so Americans, their economic angst right now is higher than it was 4 or 5 months ago. That is a problem for Republicans as they go into a midterm with the economy still top priority for voters.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Obviously, we've got some time before the midterm, so a lot of these issues are going to take some time to marinate and bake before voters will have the final say. Cornell, TW, Julia, thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. We're going to be right back with more. You're watching Meet the Press Now. All right, welcome back. A bit of a pivot here. We're going to bring the panel back and talk more. They were just so good, we decided we had to bring them back, Cornell, TW, and Julia, to talk more about some of the excitement going on in politics. I want to turn to Michigan, Cornell. That is turning out to be one of the most interesting races in the 2026 midterms. We obviously have Senator Gary Peters, who's decided not to run for re-election. Congresswoman Haley Stevens made her announcement today. There's 3 major Democrats running in that Senate race. Democrats did a pretty good job of avoiding these contentious primaries in 2024. It doesn't seem like that's happening this time around.
Good luck. That's not going to happen. Not going to happen this time around. Look, and Michigan is such an important state. Look, Democrats, any hope of Democrats making gains in the Senate, you got to hold Michigan. Right. And right now you do see, look, there's a call for a new generation of leaders and younger leaders, and there's a battle between sort of the left and middle. And, you know, Senator Sanders immediately jumped in and endorsed there, and certainly that money from the left will certainly be helpful in a Democratic primary. But in the end, we've got to land on a candidate here that the base can rally around and can win that moderate middle swath of the electorate. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of money spent, and hopefully the Democrat won't come out too beat up.
And TW, how do you feel about the Republicans' chances there? Mike Rogers probably going to run again, almost won this last time around. I mean, Republicans have to view this as a pickup opportunity, right?
Sure, it's a tough cycle. it's going to be an uphill battle all across the board, especially in this off year. Mike Rogers is a good candidate. That was actually a great ad put out today during that announcement. But I would also say that this is really, and I alluded to this before, this is a great case study in the tariff issue. United Auto Workers came out very strongly when Trump announced a lot of these tariffs. A lot of union workers are very pro-Trump, pro these tariffs. This is a state that got highly decimated with jobs moving overseas. It'll be a test study in the potency of that message among those voters moving forward.
And then another interesting race is in Arizona, Julia, and that's where we have a gubernatorial race there. And President Trump made a double endorsement today by endorsing both Karen Taylor Robson and also Andy Biggs, who is the House member who's decided to run. How do you give two endorsements for the same job?
Well, he's done that before. I think a few times. So he's done it before. And look, he endorsed Karen Taylor Robson, I think, late last year initially.
He already endorsed, and then Andy Biggs got
and then Andy Biggs, obviously a big Trump ally. So no surprise there. You know, in terms of Trump's endorsement, though, the race I'm really watching is in Texas, the Senate race. There you have John Cornyn, who I think is seriously in trouble. He is vulnerable facing someone like Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton is a very strong, staunch Trump ally, and we know that John Cornyn has broken with Trump sometimes. I've chatted with a lot of Texas Republicans who are concerned about Cornyn's future there. But I want to go back to Michigan for a second, and Cornell's point about sort of it being ground zero for, I think, the battle between progressives and, I guess, moderates within the Democratic Party. It's interesting because you have Abdul El-Sayed, who was endorsed by Bernie Sanders right out the gate, but you have Haley Stevens, who I think is so fascinating because unlike a lot of other Democrats, she came out and supported Chuck Schumer following his vote for that GOP spending bill last month. So that's certainly something to watch.
And I wonder, getting back to Texas, Cornell, I know
we have to get back.
You Democrats always salivate at the opportunity to win Texas, but if Ken Paxton is the nominee there, and if it's someone like Colin Allred that runs again, is that a state that could be in play?
Well, look, we've been promising to put Texas in play a long time, so I'm not going to sit here.
I've run down there many times.
So we're going to put Texas in play. No, well, look, Texas is it's a tough state. Texas is a country, right? So it takes an awful lot of resources and money to win there, and you also need more mobilization and galvanization of the more diverse and younger population there. There is an argument to be made that the way that we've made Georgia more purple, right, with enlarging the electorate, bringing more young people, more diverse people in that electorate in Georgia, that case can be made also that for Texas, that's also a pathway for making it more competitive. But again, we've been down this road before. It takes a lot of money to make Texas.
Well, probably the biggest way Georgia was in play were poor candidate quality from Republicans. And if that replays itself in Texas, that could be...
Poor Herschel.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys again for being here. We appreciate it. I'm really going to let you go this time because I'm going to get right to Brian Chung because we do have some breaking news as Elon Musk's Tesla just reported a big drop in revenue while blaming the political environment. Brian, this news just coming in. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Ryan, this is pretty impactful for Elon Musk's automotive company, which reported a pretty disappointing quarter for the first quarter. Car deliveries were down 12% compared to last year. Automotive revenue down 20% year over year, and their gross profit down 15% compared to last year. This is the first fiscal quarter that Tesla has reported since Elon Musk took on his responsibilities at Doge. And interestingly, two threads within the report, they cited the poor earnings, as a result of, quote, trade policy that adversely impacts the cost structure for their auto company, as well as noting that there could be a meaningful impact on the demand for their products from, quote, the changing political sentiment, likely a nod to recent vandalism of Tesla vehicles and this recent association with Elon Musk among Tesla drivers and owners. So this is very much the first big substantial impact that we've seen to his car company as a result of, in part, his association with the administration. I want to point out shares are basically flat in after-hours trading, although I want to point out Tesla stock has been one of the more beat down stocks in what was already a very bad stock market in 2025. Shares of Tesla down, get this, 41% year to date, Ryan.
I mean, and that has got to impact Elon Musk's personal wealth as well, Brian. I mean, is there any indication that this could maybe lead to him disassociating himself with the administration? I mean, how much worse could it get?
Yeah, well, we had already heard the chatter of his time with Doge, at least maybe sunsetting very soon, as was probably structured to begin with. But I do think that the question is, can he return fully and bring his attention back to Tesla, as many shareholders might want him to do? That does remain an open question. As we know, the Trump administration will be sticking around for much longer than that.
Okay. Brian Chung, thank you for jumping in there on that breaking news. Tesla's earnings, the revenues tumble, the company blaming the political environment. Brian, we appreciate it. And we are now going to go to Hallie Jackson. I'm sorry, Brian, thank you. And I want to thank the panel as well. Once again, Julia, Cornell, TW, we appreciate it all. We will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press, but the news continues right now with Hallie Jackson right now. Thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.